back, YouTube. So we're starting our sanding segment, and I'm going to be discussing sandpapers. I thought I'd start with that before we do an actual sandpaper demonstration. Sandpapers and sanders, you have several different options. And for woodworking, we're going to start today, we're going to talk about the random orbit sander and what I call a finishing sander. Back in my day, when I first started, we didn't even have random orbit sanders. You could get an orbital sander, but a random orbital was something different, and these were pretty much not used at all. What we had were what I call finishing sanders. These take a quarter sheet. Random orbital sanders come in two different types. You have generally the number of holes that's in the sandpaper is what's going to determine your sandpaper type. This one, I believe, is an 8-hole. You can also get, I think it's a 5-hole. So when you're putting these on, this is called hook and loop. Think of it like Velcro. These, you line up the holes as best you can, put the sandpaper down, and it's on there. That's all there is to it. You line up the holes and it takes the dust right through your filter. A random orbital sander is primarily what I use now. I rarely even pull out my finishing sander. You get a much better result, or at least I think I get a much better result with my random orbital sander. So if you're going to make a decision as to whether you need to buy one of these two items, I would go with that one. So sandpapers come in several different grades, or how coarse they're going to be. The smaller the number, the rougher the paper. Think of this like this. If you have 1 square inch, there are 180 pieces of sand per square inch on this piece. This one has 220 pieces of sand for each square inch. And this one would have 320. So the more of those that you have to put into each square inch, the finer and the smoother and softer the paper, because the particles have to be smaller to fit in that square inch. So I've got some hook and loop examples. You can buy this stuff in quarter sheets. A little quarter sheet is going to fit your finishing sander. The hook and loop, and you want to pay attention again to the circumference that you need. This is a 5-inch circle. And you also want to look at the number of holes. This one is a 5-hole. Whereas this sander takes 8 holes. I have 2 different sanders, so I have sandpaper for both. This type right here is for my belt and disc sander. This has an adhesive back that pulls off. So unlike hook and loop, it's like a sticker. You pull it off and stick it on. So make sure you know, because you can also get these in a stick type. Or you can buy full sheets. They also make half sheet sanders. So you would take a full sheet of this stuff, cut it in half, and you got your half sheet sander. It's just like a finishing sander, it's just longer. A quarter sheet sander is a half sander that's been cut in half again. So if you ask 10 different woodworkers how they should sand and finish your project, you're going to get 10 different answers. So I can't really tell you what you should use. I'm just going to tell you what I use. Generally speaking, I like to start with 180. I do this on all of my projects. You can also use the 120. I very rarely find it necessary to go to anything less than a 180. I don't like using coarse sandpaper on my projects, but there are times that you need it. A really coarse sandpaper like an 80 grit is going to take off a tremendous amount of material very fast. But I like to start with 180, 120 or 180, depending on my project. But generally 180. I will then move to around a 220, and then 320. And I use all 3 of these on every project in that order: 180, 220, 320. I find that that gives me a very, very good finish. You're also going to find some woodworkers, and it's going to depend also on what you're doing with your project. Are you going to stain your project, or are you going to paint your project? If you're going to paint your project, you could probably get by with just doing 180 and maybe 220. Depends on how smooth you want it. If you're going to stain your project and you're going to put something like polyurethane on, which is what I do 99.9% of the time. So when you see me discuss sandpaper, realize that I'm almost always using polyurethane. So I want a glass smooth finish, which is why that I use these 3 sanding grades. So it's going to depend on your project as to what you need to use for your sandpaper. But start out rough, go to something smoother. And then if you want to go really smooth, go to another one that's going to give you an even more smooth finish. The finished product of your woodworking project is all in the sanding. It's the most important step that you're going to have in your project. There are also differences in the material that's on the sandpaper. And I don't think I have any different types here. I went out several months ago and just restocked on a whole bunch of my sandpaper. I do it like once a year. I buy enough for the whole year. But I know that there are different types of the sand material, and you're going to have to shop around and find what works for you. I guess these are red resin. This stuff works good for me. I've used it for ages. It's made in the USA, which I kind of like. I always try to buy products that are made in the US whenever possible. Also, just for fun, for you new woodworkers out there, if you have a drill press or even a handheld drill and you need to get inside of a curve, these come in very handy. These are little drums. They fit onto one of these. You can put this in your drill press or even on your handheld drill, and you can get into curves. I don't have an oscillating spindle sander, so this is what I use. In my woodworking shop, I have a very limited amount of space, so I have to be careful what I buy for tools, particularly large tools. So that was my solution for that, at least temporarily, till I eventually decide I want one. When we come back, we're going to be doing the actual sanding process on our bread box project. So I hope this answers a few questions about sandpaper and the procedures that I use on the sandpaper, or on sanding. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask, because this is just a basic, this is what it is. There are entire articles and people write entire books, and you can find web pages dedicated to just sanding and how to sand. So my page is specifically for new woodworkers, and it's just the basics. So I'm sure there's more information out there. Feel free to look that up, and we will see you when we come back to do our actual sanding project. Thanks for watching, everyone. Happy woodworking.